Okay, so obviously we've had the PlayStation 5 Pro reveal. What we haven't had is anything to do with Nintendo Switch 2, or have we? Because there was what you might call a gigaton leak this week,
Maybe.
where essentially it looks like somebody got hold of photography of some prototype components. Looks like a shell casing, prototype mainboard, and sort of outlines of the new Joy-Cons. Yeah. CAD drawings have since emerged. CAD drawings appear to have been in the possession of Chinese YouTubers for some time. Lots going on here, lots of discussion points. What should we talk about first, John? Should we talk about the form factor? Because we've got this
Yeah.
really interesting YouTube video from Xiao Ningza, and she's basically 3D printed a Switch 2.
That's amazing.
I love it.
And it's a bit of a chonker, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting to see that. So obviously, this is all just based on the prototype stuff, the all the stuff that's leaked out this week, right? But if this matches the final design in any way, then we kind of get this impression that it's significantly larger than the Switch OLED, but it looks slimmer overall than something like a Steam Deck. Like the screen actually would be bigger than the Steam Deck, but it seems to be thinner. And the control side, the Joy-Con basically are noticeably, they're still much slimmer than the Steam Deck is a chonker, right? Like the controls sticking out the side. So this should then still carry a very similar look to the regular Switch, which honestly, I hope this is accurate because this is exactly what I think I and many others would like. We don't necessarily need Nintendo to go all out and do something crazy again here. The Switch is a fantastic design, and this sort of handheld form factor has become increasingly popular. So I think this actually makes a lot of sense. The only potential issue here is that the size itself is possibly... I'd be curious to see if this turns off any audiences, especially in like Japan or other Asian countries where, having smaller electronics is kind of sought after. This is going to be a chonker. But I do have to say, based on the designs that we did see, I like the refinements to this design, the more rounded edges that you can see on the unit itself. It sort of reminds me of the 6th through 11th gen iPhone line. When Apple was doing sort of the rounded curves on the edges, but it actually kind of works here. Again, it's hard to judge from the printing, but it does, the way this 3D print and some of the drawings have suggested, it makes it seem like the screen has larger bezels around it, which is a little bit of a bummer, but still, it seems to be an interesting size here for sure. I liked the comparison with the Sony Portal as well, because that also, I believe, uses an 8-inch screen, which is what's suggested here for this new Switch. And again, it looks much sleeker with the Joy-Con design. But those Joy-Cons are interesting because that's what we first saw the drawings for. And it looks like the connectors along the edge are quite different. There had been rumors about magnetic Joy-Cons, and I'm wondering if they're using some sort of like new system to attach these to the Switch itself. The shoulder buttons on them are larger. And I also appreciate, because of the fact that it needs to straddle a larger overall system unit, it means that the Joy-Cons themselves then would become wider, right? Making them potentially more usable and comfortable as like singular controllers, right? Because that's the whole idea, is you can take them off and use them on the side or, vertically. And I always felt like the Joy-Con were a little bit small in the original Switch for that. So that's potentially an improvement as well. But I'm wondering about that sort of center point where you can see right in the middle, there's actually some sort of like a connector on there. You guys see what I mean? If you look at the edge of the Joy-Con where it connects to the system, there's, you have the rail kind of system there, but then there's actually, it looks like a physical connector with like pins within there, which I guess that could be part of a magnetic system where it like latches in and then it connects that way. I don't know.
It's got a charge as well.
Yeah, exactly. Charge as well. So there's all that. there's a lot going on. I mean, on the surface, it's very similar, but I like what I'm seeing here in terms of the potential refinements they've made to the physical design of the case.
Yeah. I suppose the other thing to talk about is the fact that we've got USB-C's top and bottom.
Yes.
Now, principally, you would expect just the one per the original Switch, which, would go into the dock. And from there, if you needed additional functionality, additional devices, they would be plugged into the dock, right? But there's been a lot of conjecture about what this port is for. Some people suggesting there may be peripherals like cameras and whatnot that would plug into the top. I don't know what you think about that.
I mean, what if it's, and I don't know if they do this, but what if they allowed you to just plug it directly into a display over USB-C, like a Steam Deck or something? Theoretically,
you could do that from the bottom one. I guess the top one would be
easier as well. But I guess it would also mean So one of the annoying things with the current Switch is if you want to use it in tabletop mode and with the included kickstand, you can't really do that while plugging it in, right? So the USB-C connector is, it would be blocked, so you can't actually plug it in. You need a special sort of cradle dock-like thing to set it in order to actually charge and use at the same time. So this would theoretically allow you to use it in tabletop mode while charging.
Good stuff. So, Alex, I don't think I've ever met a person that's as uninterested in Nintendo Switch as you are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, but I think at least from a technological perspective, I'm just curious to see how they'll bring DLSS across. I'm curious to see battery life. I do think the size, though, is interesting because I imagine one interesting thing about it being bigger this time around, if this pans out all to be true, is that they'll have the ability to do a shrunken Switch. Like if they do shrink the die, they can actually do a shrunken version of the Switch too, for just like smaller, larger battery life. You can imagine how they could sell it, something like that. I'm also looking at the motherboard shot. I think Rich did some sleuthing there, but it's kind of confirming one of our fears that we had a while back about the.
I think that's really premature. I mean,
okay.
Let's go through the whole thing, right? We've got this main board shot here, which shows it's basically the board without any of the chips attached to it. Nothing. It's just the board, right? But you can see that there's the areas there for both of the memory modules, right? So, and they're confirmed pretty much at this point, thanks to shipping manifests as LP, DDR, 5x 7500 megatransfers per second. So, that they're assuming the modules are running at full speed, and bearing in mind what happened with Switch 1, that's no guarantee. You've got a lot of bandwidth there, but we also know the dimensions of those modules, which is 14 millimeters by 14 millimeters. So I did some perspective correction on that shot, which was not easy. And I've got to say, it's completely unscientific, this. I mean, it is, we're at the whims of Photoshop here almost. But yes, you can see that the die, the area for the package, I mean, that is confirmed there. You've got the area for the package. And then one would assume that the inner pins there may give some indication of what the die size is. And the problem with that is that, well, you can see in the background there that I've got an Xbox One X chip there that was given to me by Microsoft when I went to visit them. And I actually looked at the pin configuration on the front and compared it to the die on the other side. And, well, what can I say? They're two different areas. It's like 33% larger. So I'm not sure how much can be inferred from that. But the size of the machine, there's talk of 2 fans. I still think there's going to be people on family boards going crazy at this point, but I still think it's an 8 nanometer chip, or some other process that we're not aware of. Maybe, a 7 nanometer. Lots of conjecture about 4 nanometer. And all I can really say is that, console manufacturers have not used a cutting edge process node since 2005.
Right.
With Xbox 360, we had 90 nanometer at Xbox 360, and that was one of the reasons why it was ahead of PC parts at the time. Had the latest technology the latest process node. Nintendo doesn't do that. And in fact, Microsoft and Sony haven't done that. They've kind of like waited until those more dense nodes are actually affordable. And the concept that Nintendo would jump ahead to 4 nanometer just, doesn't make sense. And I've got another good example here. Let's go back to Tegra X1 for Nintendo Switch. We knew that the development kits had Tegra X1 in them, but everybody, including us, was hoping that the actual shipping units would have Tegra X2 in it. There were reports of noisy dev kits and whatnot, and we thought, it's a slam dunk. Tegra X2 is on a 16 nanometer node. It's going to be a smaller chip, more power efficient. It's got double the bandwidth of Tegra X1. This is like a no-brainer. Surely Nintendo will be using Tegra X2. It just makes sense. It was Tegra X1. And the reason why is, it was cheaper. It's that simple. And all I can really say about this is that don't be worried about it if it is 8 nanometers, because we've had, 7 years of amazing Switch games, miracle ports, and it all was on Tegra X1. Now, obviously, I'd love there to be a more capable processor coming, a smaller one, more power efficient, better battery life. But, it's getting really, really difficult to make cheap consoles or affordable consoles, as we saw with PS5 Pro, as we've seen with Series X and PS5. So, we've got to keep expectations in check. The other note that I have about the shot with the main board is that something that does concern me a bit is that the container area there for the battery looks very, very small compared to like a Steam Deck or a Log Ally or something like that. That is concerning, because to have good battery life, if you are on 8 nanometer or even 7 nanometer, that's going to be problematic. It means you've got to get your clock speeds all the way down to preserve battery life.
That's the concern.
So, yeah. I think we should talk about the viability of this leak in terms of whether it's genuine or not. And again, there's been a lot of research, principally by the people on family boards, about the shipping manifests coming out of Taiwan. And it does look as though there's a lot of evidence there that this is like a prototype board from October last year. So there's some good sleuthing going on there on the family boards, and it does look as though it is genuine. So things could change, but a year ago, probably not that much.
No,
I would say.
Not likely.
So, yeah, I mean, other points that, have been confirmed pretty much at this point: 12 gigs of memory, more than Series S. That's interesting. I think we're also talking about 256 gigabytes of flash memory at this point. Is it UFS 1?
Yeah, UFS 3.1.
3.1.
UFS 3.1, okay.
2100 megabytes per second, or 20 megabits per second, or whatever. I
think that's pretty good for a handheld.
I was going to say, that's actually
fine.
in ballpark Series XS territory, right? In terms of storage speed, because I think that was 2400 or so on the Xbox.
Yeah. I guess it's probably going to be about the random.
Right, the random
4K random.
That's true. But still, that actually makes me wonder more about what the game card situation will be like, because they're going to need to ensure that the speed of the flash memory on those cards is also up to snuff, right?
Yeah. Again, the Xiaoming's video is talking about the fact that the cartridges are backwards compatible. No idea about the sourcing of that information.
I suspect. I think that will be the case, but they'll have to, the new cards will certainly have to be faster and obviously larger. So I'll be curious to see what changes happen there.
The Switch 2 does have that file decompression block, which suggests, a streamlined storage and decompression system for game data there, which I think is quite good. Also, micro SD slot confirmed, but we don't really know the specifications or the transfer rates of that. You've got to assume that it's got to be compatible with the latest and greatest in order to actually run games, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so what can I say? There's lots of discussion now about a reveal coming imminently. There was talk about the Nintendo Directs that we had recently being pulled forward in order to accommodate a new Direct or some other Nintendo announcement, and everybody believes it's Switch 2. I'd love to see it. I've got no evidence that it's actually going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
We've got this question here from Aliasing Anonymous. Given the mooted specs of the Switch 2, I'm skeptical they can hit a $299 price point even on 8nm. Do you think a $399 release is unavoidable, maybe with a haircut after the OLED release? Or could Nintendo surprise us with a lower or gulp even higher price? Before I ask you about that, John, just going to point out that the Japanese yen has lost 23% of its value up against the US dollar since 2020.
Oh, yeah.
So this is going to be quite challenging, I would say. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's also one of the factors that affected the PS5 Pro.
Possibly, yeah.
And thus, I think it's very unlikely that they'll be able to get any below $400. And there's a high likelihood it could be higher. But it's really tough to say, though, because obviously Nintendo is going to be eyeing this as like the successor to their most successful game console ever. And there is definitely a sense that pricing too high could hurt that significantly. So the question is, how much of a loss are they willing to take? I think Nintendo can stomach a loss more than Sony could right now in terms of hardware, perhaps. But this is still a new generation of Nintendo. The current leadership, as I've said before, they've not launched a new console like this before. And there's a ton of pressure here coming off of the most successful console in Nintendo history. They've also traditionally struggled to launch after their successful consoles and find that same level of market share. So the fact that they seem to be playing it safe might help there, but it also makes me wonder, like, are they going to, let's say the price is high, $500 or something. What if they sit on the current Switch and they continue? You remember the old pillar strategy, even though it didn't really pan out that long, but they did for the DS and the GBA, where they said they had the DS, the GameCube, and the GBA, and they're like, oh, the DS is just the third pillar, sort of like hedging their bets in case it wasn't a success. You have to wonder, like, are they going to do a lot of multi-platform stuff early on? Like, how long are they going to try to keep the regular Switch going? Which I feel like they might need to do if this price is really high. I
don't think they can afford to make it that expensive.
No, I know that's the problem, right?
Term view.
I feel like $399 is where they would like to be, but it's still going to be tough. I think.
Yeah, I guess my worry is, what can I say? I think Nintendo is more likely to actually consider taking a hit in terms of subsidies, as opposed to letting a system roll out as a failure out of the gate.
Right.
Which is a very real possibility. Going back to 3DS, there was a pricing issue there at launch, wasn't there?
It was too expensive, yeah. They knocked it down within like 6 or 8 months, and they did that whole apology tour, if you recall.
Apology tour.
Yeah, remember there's like the ambassador games. Here's all these GBA games, and you want to tell him, we're sorry, it was too expensive kind of messaging, right? I think you're right, though. I think that they would rather take a hit than price this too high. They need to get this at a reasonable cost. But then you look at like the cost of the current Switch OLED, and that's still like $350, right?
Yeah.
So like it's just wild to me to think that they're going to be able to sell a much more capable machine for just $50 more.
Well, that all depends on how much profit they've taken up.
The thing is, though, I guess with Nintendo more than most others, certainly more than Sony and Microsoft, I think they can more easily make back whatever lose. They can subsidize it more easily because their software is a gigantic draw to this hardware, right? Like that is one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, that people are buying Nintendo hardware in the first place. They want those Nintendo games. So those Nintendo games are going to sell. So
yeah, if they have like a new Pokemon, I mean, they're pumping out Pokemon really regularly these days. So if they have like a new Pokemon for launch period,
I don't know if they'd actually have that, but I think they'll have like something like a new Mario. I think that's going to be hit around the time of Metroid Prime 4. which will probably be multi-plat. I would assume then that you'd get like a nice, much higher res version on the Switch 2 using DLSS and all that. And Retro Studios would be able to leverage that well more than many, I'd assume, right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm. Final point before we move on. We know it has ray-tracing capable hardware. We know it's going to be using DLSS. Alex, could this actually be a Nintendo console of interest to you?
No. Like, I just don't play games on the go ever. So I would sit in a corner and play it. It wouldn't be as nearly as fun as the way other people play with it. I think the one thing I'm curious to see what it means for multi-platform gaming right now, because games are having to scale down the Series S and making large compromises there. But I think the spec sheet here does make it a little bit more feasible to scale multi-platform games, especially ones that target 60 FPS here. I'm just very curious about like CPU, how that fares in comparison to what we see on the other console side. I'm also curious about like, what's the memory interface? We know the amount of RAM and the speed, but is it like 64-bit? There's a lot of open-ended questions here. We just still don't know too much about.
Yeah, and obviously whether they run the memory modules at full speed.
Probably not.
Because, there were variable speeds on Switch 1. The mobile clocks were lower than docked.
Your point about the battery concerns me about the clocks, because if they're using that little tiny battery in there, I feel like they're going to crank all the clocks way down.
200 megahertz.
Like, well, how low can they go?
I think there's basically a limit on how low an ampere GPU can actually run. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Yeah, possibly.